It's just a dream, Thomas told himself. He was within his home among the California hills, a place he had chosen specifically for the way the fresh air of the mountains mingled with the ocean breeze. But if there was a wind blowing, he could not hear it, and he could not feel it. He was inside his study, a place he had designed for his writing, the windows angled to look out from the slope of the hills and towards the bay without allowing too much sunlight to flood the room. But the sunlight was muted, and the bay was shrouded in a fog so thick it seemed like a living thing. It crawled out from the sea and onto shore like some breed of ghostly planarian, swallowing the city like it might devour a cluster of rigid worms. And all of this, Thomas studied from the black reflection of his antique computer monitor, eyes wide, stinging as sweat slid down into them, refusing to blink. Thomas, renowned author though he was not writing anything at the moment. It's just a dream, he said again, trying to coerce some kind of greater response from himself. But the whispered words were spoken in vain, for he was frozen, trapped in his seat, unable to escape the cold, steep grip of his fear. In the reflection, he could clearly see the eclipse occurring outside, the face of the sun obscured by a black, irregular mask. He could see that demon mist drawing closer and closer, dragging itself silently up the hills and towards his abode. But neither the stolen sun nor the unnatural progress of the mist from the bay managed to menace Thomas enough to break his eyes from the true object of his anxiety, the inimical cause of his burgeoning terror. Thomas was well acquainted with fear and danger, as he had experienced both in enormous excess during his time as a firefighter. But no mere brush with death, no consideration of a painful end by flame and smoke could compare with the fear that settled over him at the mere suspicion of what he thought he might see in that black mirrored surface. It was there now, an indistinct shape standing in the corner of the room. It drew closer to him, and the sight of its motion made him want to scream. His breath began to labor, rushing in and out. It was so small, no taller than a child really, but with features that were wrong. He tried not to look at it, but he could not look away. It's just a dream, he almost sobbed, starting to tremble, hands shaking, body tingling and quaking out of his control. It came closer still, and Tom felt every cell in his guts churn. He was close enough to hear it breathing, but he did not, for it drew no air through its thin, gray lips. But he could hear the muted pit-pat of its bare feet and the soft creaking of the wooden floor. And, soon enough, Thomas could see himself reflected, his own side and back being mirrored for him from the cold, dark depths of deep eyes. He reached down with a sudden jerk, grabbing the head of his computer tower, thumb fumbling for the power switch and pressing it firmly once he found it. The screen flashed, a bolt of white obscuring the image in the black, blanking out what he did not want to see. The computer did not go to its boot-up screen, however. Instead, it opened straight away to his text document, the one for his newest book. He hadn't even titled it yet, and he did not stop to title it now. It was blank, a pure white page. And, looking into it, he could not see the face or shadow of that horrible thing. Was it still there? He could not tell. He could not hear anything suddenly, not past the pulsing beat of his heart, now thumping in his ears instead of in his chest. For a moment, just a moment, he felt that his eyes were adjusting to the sudden change in color, and in that milky, inky whiteness of the screen, he began to make out another reflection. He lifted his trembling hands up and slammed them down against the keys before him, fingers loudly tapping and clacking as his rising and falling digits began to hammer out the first paragraph, and then the second, He thought he heard something, but he could not hear it over the sound of his typing. He thought he could see something, but instead focused on the black letters filling the white screen block by block by block. But when he felt the small, four-fingered hand fall against the damp, cold fabric of his shirt and press possessively against his back, Thomas could no longer ignore it. He could no longer lie to himself. Feeling a fever pitch rise within him, boiling up from his guts and up into his throat, he opened his mouth as widely as he could and... Thomas woke himself with his own scream, jerking awake in a violent frenzy of limbs and movement. He nearly pitched himself from the bed, kicking his heavy, soaked sheets off and onto the floor. He panted hard, broad chest rising and falling as he looked around, wild-eyed. He paused then, seeming to freeze for a couple of moments before going slack and breathing a heavy sigh of relief. Moments later, he heard a soft knock at his bedroom door and felt the brand of shame color his face. In moments like these, he truly felt like he had no control, not only over his night terrors, but his life. Tom took a deep, calming breath and released it slowly. "Come in," he said, his voice more hoarse than he had expected it to be. The door creaked open, a set of shy, chocolate-brown eyes peeking in from the edge. "It's all right. I'm all right," Thomas said to his wife, Samantha. She nodded hesitantly, entering inside the room and affecting a sweet, false smile. He knew he was all right. He knew the signs of when that time came. But she did not, and since he had lied about it in the past, tried to protect her from it, she was left without the ability to trust him. Not about this. But he knew how to prove it to her. He smiled back at her, his own affectation only marginally less false than her own. Fear and love were what formed the mask on Samantha's face. For Thomas, it was love and guilt, but at least he knew their love was still there. Samantha had been willing to accept what it might mean to marry a former firefighter. She had made a commitment to resilience upon that day. Yet even so, he felt he was placing an unfair burden on her. After all, he had been out of the job for almost 3 years when the dreams began, and they had nothing to do with fire. He rolled out of bed, and she came to him, embracing him, and then he her. He held her for a time, before going straight to his nightstand and fishing out the key to his study. He would shower later. The study was upstairs, a room of its own, and with its own purpose. Once he'd found success with his writing, he'd made sure to always leave a space for that work. In his former home, it had been a deep, cozy basement without windows or distractions, save for the thumping feet of his 2 children upstairs. Once he had moved again, he chose to go the opposite route. Up the winding stairs and down the longest corridor he walked, to the very end where lay the maple wood door that led into his study. He arrived, lifted his hand, and slid the key into the heavy iron lock. He twisted and then took the doorknob into his hand. The room was just as he had left it in his dream. The windows looked out over the long, warm shadows of a new morning, the faint mist retreating back into the maw of the bay. And there, against the wall, was his computer tower. He sat down in his comfortable chair and flexed his hands. He could feel Sam's eyes pressing against his back, her stare connecting them, though she lingered by the door and did not yet enter the room. He pressed the power key at the head of the tower and watched the screen flicker, watched the computer begin to boot. They were in silence throughout it, listening to the song of the early morning birds, the beginning murmurs of waking life out and around their home. But they were silent. Finally, the white screen. He took a deep breath, though he did not know why he was nervous. He knew. He always knew, before sitting down, whether or not that time had come again. His fingers drifted down onto the keys and touched them ever so lightly. And then the tapping began. His new novel, which he had been unable to even begin up until now, came pouring out of him like a fountain out from his rising and falling fingers. His wife breathed a sigh of relief and came up behind him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders as he typed. "I'll go make breakfast. Take your time," she whispered, kissing his ear before giving him a squeeze and leaving him to the work. He went on for only a couple of hours, stopping in time to meet his children at the table before school. Even so, his frenzied fingers had filled an impressive amount already. He came down into the dining room, smiling at the three seated there, this time genuinely. He ruffled the hair on his 13-year-old son and kissed his younger daughter on the forehead. Thomas then took his seat and was served a hearty breakfast in short order. He'd almost forgotten his nightmare, too distracted by the smoky flavor of fresh sausage and eggs to linger on those thoughts, until they came to linger on him. "Daddy, why do you scream?" asked Elisa. Thomas hesitated, breakfast dropping from his fork and back onto his plate before he had time to stop it. Sam, too, had been taking a sip of her coffee and nearly choked on it. Both failed to recover quite quickly enough to stop Timmy from answering her question. "Dad screams because he is going to have a writing day, or when he's going to take time off," the boy said, not bothering to look up as he shoveled cereal into his mouth, the smartphone beside his bowl keeping his eyes captive. "Daddy, are you taking time off?" Elisa asked, large eyes turning to him and, again, choking off any response he may have had. But this time, Sam took over. "No, sweetie, he isn't doing that today," she said to the small girl. "Oh!" Timmy exclaimed. "Does that mean you started your next book, Dad?" he asked excitedly. "That's right," Thomas said, wiping his lips with a napkin. "Is it the next Galaxy Razor story?" the boy pressed, bouncing in his seat excitedly. Or is it another scary story?" he added a moment later, his enthusiasm bleeding out of him as he mentioned that possibility. Thomas smiled. "It's the next Galaxy Razor," he confirmed. "Yes!" Timmy hissed in triumph. "What's it called?" Thomas smirked and placed his hand on his chin, eyes wandering up in thought. "Well, it's not final, but..." Thomas said, restraining a laugh as his son leaned in. Yeah? The boy pressed. "Well, I was thinking something like Final Stop, Treasure Planet. What do you think?" he began to say before being cut off by his son's sudden cry. "What? Are we finally going to the Treasure Planet? But hasn't that been Adler's goal all along?" asked the boy, eyes wide, mouth almost agape. "Yep," Thomas said, still smiling. Wait, his son added, mood suddenly dampened. "Doesn't that mean this will be the last Galaxy Razor book?" he asked his father. Thomas's smile shrank somewhat, and he nodded. "That's right, it is," he said. The words seemed to steal the spirit from the young boy, who now struggled with how to take the news. As he was, his sister spoke up in the silence. "Daddy, where do you go when you take time off?" Elisa asked. Another pause then, as no one jumped to answer the question. "I have a cabin. It's a few hours away in the mountains," Thomas said. "I spend a week or two up there when I go," he said. "Oh, why do you go?" she asked him. "Elisa," Sam began, but Thomas raised his hand to stop her. "I go because sometimes my head gets so filled up with ideas and thoughts that I need to find a place to be alone and let them all out," he lied. His daughter nodded, eyes wide, believing every word, and he thought that would be enough. "What do you do to let the thoughts out?" she asked. "Okay, I think it's time to get ready for school. Both of you brush your teeth and meet me next to the car," Sam said. "But Mom," Timmy whined. No buts. Up and wash those teeth," she said sternly. The children whined and dragged their feet, but did as they were told, chairs scraping hard flat floors, feet thumping as they went to finish getting clean. "Thanks," Thomas said after they were gone. "Don't thank me too much," Sam sighed, shaking her head. "They will both need answers eventually. And so will I," she said, looking back up at him. Tom nodded. "You'll be the first to know as soon as I do," he said softly. She nodded, not wholly convinced. "Well, hopefully you will find out today at Dr. Albert's," she said. He asked. "Your psychologist, Tom. You have an appointment today, remember?" she said. "Oh, right. Yeah," he answered in a weakening tone. She turned and locked eyes with him, coming closer. "Baby, you promised me you wouldn't stop digging," she said to him. I know. It's just, Sam, I don't get the feeling that this is something I can solve by just talking about it," he said. "So you're going to quit?" she asked. He held her gaze for a few moments before leaning in, meeting her lips with his. "Course not, Sam. Not now, not ever," he whispered. She smiled, and the smile filled him from the bottom of his toes to the brim of his skull. "Attaboy," she whispered before kissing him again. Dr. Albert was an owl of a man, and Thomas did not think so just because of his bald, round head, flared ears, and large, even rounder spectacles. The man had a stiff but silent quality to him, rarely moving his neck or shoulders even as he walked, yet always moving in a precise, calculated way. Not awkward, just stiff, avian even. He sat with his legs folded together, one over the other, pencil and notepad in his hand as he roosted from his large black chair. He blinked twice quickly and gestured for Thomas to take a seat. The large man did so, sighing heavily as he did, and then laying back, having selected the lounging chair. Dr. Albert had 3 chairs, each positioned to be appropriate for his guests. Some chose to sit across from him in a chair much like his own, while others chose to sit to his right, resting in the large, plush lazy-boy he kept there. But Thomas would always choose the lounging chair to Dr. Albert's left. Made of barely worn dark leather, it was just the kind of thing he would see in old movies. It squeaked as he settled onto it. The leather was more stylish than comfortable, but it tickled him to use it, adding some novelty to the hour-long sessions he had been partaking in. But now he did it more out of habit, the novelty having worn thinner each time. "Good morning, Thomas," said the psychologist, scribbling something in his pad, though his eyes did not look away as he did. Thomas could not tell. The lounging chair was made so that one could choose to lay back in one direction or the other, and as usual, Thomas had chosen to lay looking away from the man. It wasn't that he thought Dr. Albert was an ugly man, but he did hate having to look at his enlarged, bespectacled eyes for an hour at a time. "Morning, Doctor. Seen any good movies lately?" Thomas asked, stretching now that he had laid out. "Good morning. And yes, actually, a film called Rusty," the doctor said, scribbling as if taking notes on his own opinion. "Oh, what's it about?" asked Thomas. "Charming movie. It followed the son of an old mechanic and his dog as they travel across the country trying to repair the mechanic's oldest car. Very heartfelt," said the psychiatrist. Thomas sighed through his nose. "Sounds nice, but a bit out of my genre," said the former firefighter. "All right, then let's talk about that genre. Have you been feeling inspired by something? A movie, maybe? Maybe a dream?" asked Dr. Albert. Thomas felt his brow furrow. "Sam, she told you, didn't she?" Thomas asked, a bitter sting lacing itself through his tone. "Yes, she did. Is that wrong?" asked Dr. Albert. "It's intrusive, is what it is. I don't need her reporting my actions at home to you, Doc. Don't take it the wrong way, but even being here is a chore for me. I don't need the extra aggravation of knowing my wife is informing on me," said Thomas. "It isn't like she told me what you had for breakfast, Tom. She called ahead to tell me that you had another nightmare, and that you resumed your work after. Only things that are pertinent between us, that's all," reasoned the psychiatrist. "That's all? That's too much if you ask me. She shouldn't be going over my head. It should be my decision what I tell you about," Thomas retorted. "All right, I see your point. I'll inform Samantha to clear it with you before she calls me to tell me anything. But, Thomas, you were going to tell me about your dream, right? And your new book?" Dr. Albert asked. Thomas did not answer, crossing his arms and mulling on bitter thoughts. Now it was Dr. Albert's turn to sigh. Look, Thomas, may I be frank with you, man to man? The doctor asked. Tom paused to consider before shrugging and nodding, still facing away. You are not working with me, and that is the reason Sam felt she needed to call ahead. Let's be real for a moment. You are a man who suffers from far worse than typical night terrors. You are a writer who cannot write until your dreams scare you into doing so. And before the dreams, you were the farthest thing from a writer. No practice, no schooling, or even interest in other books, in or outside your genre, as you call it. The doctor said, with a shake of his head, rising and walking across the room to a large shelf jammed with books. He strode along it until he selected one particular novel from its confines and tugged it free of the press. Thomas was mildly surprised to see that it was the 6th book in his Galaxy Razor series, A Wrinkle in the Void. Were that all there is to it, you would just be a fascinating but less than alarming case. After all, dreams don't kill people. You seem to sleep all right most of the time, and, frankly, most of us do not get any profitable benefit from our nightmares. Interesting, but that's all. But you aren't here because you scream in your sleep twice a week and write best-selling novels, Thomas, said the doctor. The former firefighter grit his teeth behind his lips, but otherwise restrained his response. The doctor was right, of course, and he knew exactly where he was going with this. I once thought your issues were unrelated, that you were having an affair and using your story as a cover for it. Then I assumed it must be something criminal or similar. Now I'm convinced that your, escapades, whatever they may be, are fueled by these dreams, or these books. The answer is somewhere inside either of those, continued Dr. Albert. But that's just it, Doc, said Thomas, sitting up. I don't believe that, he said. I know they seem linked, and maybe they are, but I really just don't feel that I will get any answers talking about my dreams or books anymore. The dream is always the same, and the books... I don't know what you're going to find in my scattered collection of action-adventure novels and horror stories, but I really doubt it will be anything related to my trips, the man insisted. Okay, then let's go over the trips themselves, the doctor said. Thomas groaned while the doctor seated himself in front of Tom, perching on a stool situated there likely for just this reason. Again? The former firefighter asked. Again, the doctor said. Thomas sighed again and laid back, getting more comfortable. From when? Asked Thomas. From the start, said Dr. Albert. Tell me as clearly as you can manage, he said. Taking a deep, slow breath, Thomas closed his eyes and paused for a moment before beginning. I had the dream, but it was different, he said. Different how? Asked Dr. Albert. You already know how. I'm not repeating that part again, Thomas snapped. All right, no need. Please continue, said the doctor, scribbling away. I woke up, and I was cold. I remember that really clearly, being so cold when I opened my eyes. I got up and showered, and then I hugged Samantha in the hallway, said Thomas. Did you already feel the need? Asked the doctor. Thomas nodded stiffly. From the first moment, and it only got stronger the longer I waited. He affirmed in a softer tone. Like a guilty promise or something. Just this powerful feeling, this knowing that if I didn't go, someone would get hurt. Maybe me, maybe not me. I felt it even before the dream ended, and I felt it all the way until the end. The doctor scribbled maddeningly, though he had heard this all before. Please, continue, he urged. Okay. I went into my study and sat down and turned on the computer. I had to try, but when I reached for the keys, I just couldn't move my fingers, not even to type my name. I could slap my hands against the keyboard or poke the letters one at a time like a child, but I just couldn't type anymore. And even if I could, I had no idea what I would write down. The need just filled my head. I've never been addicted to anything, but I feel like this must be what it's like. I couldn't feel or think about anything else. It ate up all the thoughts in my head, all my ideas. Even hunger and thirst, just gone, replaced by the need, said the former firefighter. So, after you tried to type and failed, what did you do? I left. I walked right past Sam, right into the kitchen, and took the keys. I didn't even pack. I went straight there. Didn't shit, didn't eat, just drove the whole 2 hours to the cabin. It was like I didn't even have free will until I got there, Thomas said. Did you try to leave once you arrived? Asked the doctor. Tom nodded. Yeah, but you know how dangerous those back roads are, and this really thick mist rolled in right after I got there. I tried to drive back, but 2 or 3 close calls later, I decided to wait it out, but it didn't dissipate. I made myself at home as best I could, and when night came, I went to bed. And then I woke up. No nightmares, no dreams at all. Sky was clear and I drove back, he said. And was it before or after you got back to your home that you found out you had been gone for almost a month? And when precisely did you notice all of your new injuries? The scrapes, the bruises, the burns, and odd scratches? Asked Dr. Albert. Not until I got back. I mean, it was not my first time, Doc, so it's not like I had expected to be coming back on the same day. But I don't know how I didn't notice my injuries, and I have no idea where I got them from. I really didn't feel like I was anything but normal when I awoke, but looking back, it's almost like I was in a light trance or something, said the patient. And you have no memory at all of anything between the times you fell asleep to the time you woke up? Nothing? Pressed Dr. Albert. Not even dreams. Trust me, there's no one this bothers more than me, Tom affirmed. The doctor nodded, filling the room with the smooth, continuous scratching of scraping pen against paper as he wove his physician's cursive up and down the pages of his notebook. That was his only response for nearly a minute. Do you have any plans for when this happens again? The doctor asked, mostly to fill the silence as he continued to write. Thomas smiled for the first time since walking in and nodded. Hell yeah, you better believe I do. The dream came the very next night, and Thomas knew without waking that the omen was a bad one. He stood in his study, facing away from the windows and watching the fog crawl out of the bay and into the city under a dark sky, all from the reflection of the black screen. And it was there as well. It seemed closer this time. No, not closer, more real. He made out more details with his glance, wide eyes and a round head, wrinkled skin in places and smooth skin in others, a small, purse-lipped mouth. He opened his mouth to shout, but could not hear himself. He reached down, fumbling for his computer and pressing the power button, watching as the black screen went white, obscuring the details of the reflection like it normally did. Except the face. The horrible face was just as clear now as it had been before. He had to obscure it, had to hide from it. He closed his eyes, but he could see through his lids. Thomas felt himself shaking all over, listening to the thump, thump, thump of each step drawing closer in the silence of the room. He could hear its raspy trill, could smell its strange odor. He reached for the keys, desperate, but found his hands clumsy, slow, and then frozen. He could not cover the face as it came to stand beside him, and he could not obscure the sound of its horrible voice when it spoke, pressing its small, four-fingered hand into his back.